Hey, it's Nikki, Llewellyn Gregory, and you're on Gut Plus Science. You're in for a fast-paced, storytelling, action item-rich leadership growth experience. I hope you make this podcast a habit. I consider it a leadership mentoring tool. Learning together makes us better together, and that is how we change the world around us. Let's get to it. Hey, it's Nikki, and I'm here with Steve Perkins again for our RootsUp series. Steve and Greenhouse have created some epic foundational learning topics, and there's so much opportunity with their courses and their teachings and workbooks and all of the different tools. And we're trying to do our very best to summarize these core topics into these short episodes. So I'm just teasing out the fact that we're touching on the core things, but there's so much more to go and learn from Greenhouse and dig in past what we get to capture in this very tight episode. But Steve, this is a topic I'm so passionate about, meetings that actually drive impact, right? Like rather than having a meeting just to have a meeting, which I think is most meetings, how do we ensure that every meeting is intentionally designed, it energizes and drives outcomes, right? And let's help the leaders today. And I'm ready to learn from you too, because I'm real passionate about this topic, how to make meetings more productive and enjoyable. And you've got like a 3-component approach that you're going to break down for us. So let's dig in for a couple minutes and just meet people where they are with the frustration of meetings. Like, why are they so frustrating?
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I've been in all kinds of work environments, and the worst one was my experience in the Fortune 500 corporate America space, because the day is packed full of meetings back to back. And then you get home and flop on the couch after a long day, and you're like, well, crap, I didn't even start any of my real work. I've just been going to meetings, and we didn't even accomplish anything in these meetings. What did we do? And then even worse, the feeling of politics, that we were all just trying to look smart in the meeting and get our 2 cents in, and no one's listening to each other. And then we leave the meeting and we don't know who's doing what. And it's just a mess. And I thought many times, because my previous life, I was an engineer. And so my brain goes into this problem solving mode, okay, we got to create a system that works. So I'm like you, I'm passionate about these things, because meetings form the majority of our workday. So to me, what made just logical sense is, okay, if we want work to be good, then we have to make meetings good. Like, this is just obvious. Why are we not talking about this? We talk about all these fancy articles and TED Talks about making work better. And I'm like, but we're missing the thing that actually occupies the whole workday, which is meetings. And they suck. So let's make them better.
I'm so glad that you brought up the point that I call the concept corporate ego. I'm so far removed from that by design nowadays that
Yeah.
I forget that that's such a huge issue. And, where my mind goes is the intentional design of a meeting and the agenda for clarity of why we're here and how we're going to participate in our stop time. Like I am all locked in, and you're helping me right now with on my team. I don't feel like we have much of that ego stuff going on, like I said, by design, but it is a norm, and it does happen when, you're in larger meetings doing things with partnerships or sales efforts, right? And how we knock that till as best we can to really make those authentic meetings move things forward, right? And so let's talk about, you had said there's really 3 core areas that you guys attack: lack of clarity, lack of engagement, and lack of structure, right? So take us down that path of knocking those problems out the way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the core issue here is we've all learned how to do our job functions. So we went to school for years and years, paid potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars to learn how to, in my case, do engineering stuff, math and science. I never once learned how to lead people well, how to do my taxes, how to be a parent, and how to lead meetings. Like the stuff that occupies most of my life, I never learned. And so to me, all of these topics, all this stuff, it's not just go to a conference and rah rah get excited about leadership and inspired. Like that doesn't cut it. We actually have to talk about the how do you do it, because that's where the rubber meets the road. We haven't learned how. So yeah, no wonder meetings tend to be terrible because none of us learned how. And then we join the workforce and we never talk about how to do the work. We never talk about how to interact as a team. We just start doing the work. And then we're surprised when things go sideways. So I think, yeah, the foundation is realizing as a leader, a huge chunk of your job now is not doing the work, but designing how to do the work. And that is the shift most leaders, especially senior leader levels, need to realize that often haven't because no one told us. It's a shift. My job is no longer to do the tasks all day. It's to think about how we do the work as a team and to create that environment. So, that's job number one. If this is news to you, then okay, sit down with a coach or something, or at least your notebook, and think about this mental shift. Because this is like newsflash, you have a new job description now, and it's not doing the work. It's designing how we do the work. So with that understanding, okay, now I can think about how do we run meetings well? And yeah, to your point, Nikki, it's like, I mean, this is a whole study. Some people spend their whole lives studying and learning like how to do these things well. And I think there is a core reality that we have to understand what is it that's going on when human beings meet. The way I like to think about it is like in a marriage relationship. So I've been married for 16 years. My wife and I are opposite personalities, which at Greenhouse we also do a lot of like coaching couples, and you see the pattern, like opposites do attract. It's a real thing. And so we always have this dynamic in some way, shape, or form where the two people have differing personalities. And so a lot of what happens, like for us, is Ashley's a very detailed, like kind of binary, black and white, tactical person. I'm a very big picture, conceptual, dreamer, forward looking person. And so something as simple as like talking about the dinner plans, we clash if we're not careful because I'm sharing like this big idea and she's thinking about the details. And so this kind of dynamic happens in meetings all the time. So recently I was with a leadership team. They were doing an offsite kind of strategic planning and team building. And we split the room into two groups. And we'll dig into these terms more in a second. But we said, okay, people who are flare people go over to this side of the room. People who are focus people go over to this side. So flare people are kind of the brainstormers, the ideators, they're more like me, the bigger picture. Focus people are like let's make a decision, let's take action, let's close this thing down. And once they got to their side of the room, we had them write down on Post-it notes, what annoys you about the other group? And it's the most fun exercise because they start roasting each other. And then I'm standing in the middle and I'm like, okay, focus people. Tell me, just shout it out. What annoys you about all them? And they're like, they're so distracted. They never focus, like they never get anything done. They're always coming up with new ideas like when we're trying to decide something. They're always like, I actually doubt if they really know what they're doing, is basically what that team said. I don't think they're competent, like, because they can't like focus and decide and get a thing done. They're always like kind of dreaming. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. And the room is all laughing. Everyone's kind of just like uncomfortable chuckling because we're hitting them with reality. And I look to this side. I'm like, all right, flare people. What annoys you about them? And they're the optimist type, so they're a little like at first they didn't have a whole lot of criticisms. They're like, oh, I don't know. They're all nice. They're nice people. Like, come on, give it to me. And then it starts coming out, and they're like, well, they never understand the why behind what we're doing, and they never want to talk about it. They're always rushing to like just do the thing, but they don't understand the context. And they're always like forgetting about the people involved. And a lot of times there's a better way to do something, and they're so fixed on the plan that we already had, and I've got a new, better way. And so here they are, like roasting each other. And then we sat down and we're like, all right, so y'all said that this was a waste of time to talk about how you run your meetings. And you wanted to get to the good stuff, the important stuff of strategic planning. And I made you do this thing about meetings. So, like, what are your thoughts now? And sure enough, people start saying, Oh, yeah. I can see how, like, this is the stuff that causes conflict and misunderstanding in our meetings, and we don't even know it because it's invisible. And I said, "Yeah, sure enough, because this is like these are the 2 types of personalities that come into a meeting is flair and focus." And what happens is the whole meeting we're butting heads without realizing it, and the flair people are bringing up new ideas, and focus people are shutting down your ideas, and then we walk out of the room with our heads hanging low, feeling like it was an unproductive, non-optimized use of our time.
And going back to what you were saying about you and your wife and studies about opposites attract, right? There's so much goodness when you find that rhythm of being able to bring those 2 together, but the challenge of like, "But how? But how
Yeah.
do we do that?" And
Ow.
so, yeah, I'm curious how flair and focus in a meeting flow.
Yeah. Once you have this understanding, I mean, the painful part is you start seeing it in every meeting right away. Like you and I are both going to see it in our meetings this afternoon. Like, oh my gosh. And so, to your point, there's kind of these three modes that a meeting can be in, and it's flair and it's focus. And the third one is share. And share is just capturing that general like information updates. I'm just sharing information. I am informing you or updating you on something. Status meeting can be like this. And that's important too. Whereas the flair is more of the, hey, we're here to brainstorm, come up with ideas or solutions, kind of widen the scope of what we're talking about. Focus is, like it says, it's kind of narrowing it down and trying to come to a decision or trying to make a plan of action with dates and owners. And it's narrowing things down. And so the idea is if you have these three modes, and this is what we've been talking about in this series, is this is just a very simplified, like 80-20 rule. This is the one little thing that'll make a massive impact in your meetings for the better, is that you just have these three modes and you call it out. And so, Nikki, if you and I were meeting today about, hey, our podcast engagement is doing okay, but we'd like to grow that and get people more excited this year about our podcast. So this is a flare meeting. Like I want to get more ideas out there. I want to just like sky's the limit. Let's try to widen the scope. Is you just call it out. And then if the meeting after that is about like, hey, what's our plan for next week? All right, this is a focus meeting. I'm trying to nail down like plans and priorities and dates.
I like this. Okay, so I have a question now that I'm understanding that these are the types of meetings, flare, focus, or share are the types of meetings. Do you ever have one meeting and a section for flare and a section for focus? Is that one and the same, or you want to have dedicated times that are separate?
Yeah, that's a good point. So it can go either way. Like an entire meeting can be one mode, or it can have multiple modes throughout it. So I think there's two important things here for a leader. And when I say leader, in this case, it's even just if you're the one facilitating a meeting or if you called the meeting. I mean, a lot of times in our team, the admin is the one running the meeting because they are the one kind of like keeping the agenda on track. And that person might not consider themselves a leader, but like in this scenario, they are. So, okay, so the two things are this: call the mode up front. Like say, hey, we're going to have a flare conversation here. And then actually toward the end, we need to have a focus conversation and make some decisions. So call up front what you want it to be so that everyone's aware. But then you can also call the mode if it changes unintentionally. So this happens a lot of times. We're sharing ideas and the focus people with that personality, they're immediately going to like analyzing brain and trying to decide. And so they start shutting down my idea because they're like, that's not going to work. But Nikki, they like your idea and they're like, yeah, okay, let's do that. Here's what we need to do. And suddenly you notice as the leader, the conversation has shifted from like a brainstorming to a deciding. And what I'm going to do is just kind of, and we call it a gut card. It's like, hey, gut card, hold up. I think we're shifting the mode here. Let's just call it out. Let's just decide if we want to do that or not. And maybe I'm the one in charge and I'm just going to make the decision, or maybe together we need to decide, but we're calling it out. I mean, it can be for like 20 seconds, but we're just creating the conversation and the awareness of, all right, the vibe in the room just changed, just shifted. Do we want to go there, or do we want to table that for later and stay on the brainstorming? Because what happens is these shifts unintentionally happen, and then it causes collateral damage, and we don't know why. We're picking up the pieces later. So if we just call it and decide together, then we can move all aligned in the same direction. Does that make sense as like the difference between calling it out before versus in the moment?
Oh, it does, and I could see I'm just thinking, you know how I told you as we were getting started and preparing for this, I'm like, I am obsessed with maximizing meetings, and I like to start on time, end on time, have clarity of why we're there, roles, all of that, right? And I'm like, "Oh, what am I gonna pick up today?" Well, this is brand new to me. So, like, this whole thought of, okay, the vibe of what we're doing when it's, hey, dedicated to brainstorming time, but we also know we have to get some things done and make some decisions in this meeting and get them accounted for on our project management board, right? You know, we can dedicate this 25 minutes to flair to come up with those, but we have to make sure whoever's running that meeting, they're dedicating and calling out a shift to the mode of focus so that we're like, there's at least three things we're putting on that project management board today, and we're all deciding that today together, right?
Exactly.
I think that that's fantastic because I think so much of why people get frustrated with meetings is, what are we doing? Like, what's the purpose of what we're doing right now? Like, I don't even know, A, why am I here? Which I'll just throw out a quick tip on our from our team. What we do is if you're ever invited to a meeting that you don't think you should be at because the meeting clearly says what it's for in the agenda, you opt out. Right? Because it's that 50-50 ownership, like, you think of engagement at work. It's not like, it's all on my leader in the workplace to make sure I'm engaged, it's like, it's a 50-50 effort. Same thing with this in meetings, it's like, you know, we're there for a purpose, and you as a team member to know if, like, you're like, "Can I just get the recording of this? Because 'Cause you're discerning that on your own, right? That's the part that you can play in that. So, just wanted to say the importance of intentionality of using the time.
Well, it's such a good example because it illustrates you guys have taken the time to talk about how we do the work together so that people can behave and act in a way that's helpful and good. It's like, okay, the way that we do meetings is the agenda's always there. You look ahead of time, you decide if you should be there. So now like it flows smoothly. And then, to your point, so you're doing such a good thing there of like setting up the intentionality of what a meeting's about. But then the chaos that ensues within a meeting is humans, personalities clash. And so this is where that mode shift can really help. Because here's what happens, and I'll actually share a story of a team I led where this happened. So what happens is if we're shifting, let's say, from brainstorming to planning and deciding and planning, the flair people start getting itchy and they're freaking out because all of a sudden, like it feels like ideas are being shut down. Feels like they're being shut down. It feels like we're going into this mode I don't like, and it feels too stiff and too cluttered. All of a sudden, I'm claustrophobic. But meanwhile, the focus people, they've been hating the meeting all since the beginning with all the ideas. And they're like, can we just decide and move on, please? They don't see the purpose of ideation. And so I had a team once where we had both types on the team, but there were two individuals who were like extreme ends of this spectrum. So there was one guy who he was extreme on the flair side. And what we said was, "Hey, Mark, whenever we are doing a focus meeting, you can just you can wait outside." And he laughed and he loved it. He was like, "Yes, free me from the terrible meetings." And the other person who is a natural focus person, we're like, "Yeah, when it's brainstorm time, you can just skip that one. We're good. We'll bring you in when we need to make decisions." And she loved it because she was like, felt very empowered that, hey, we're going to use my skill set when it's time, but I don't have to sit there painfully wait through the part that I don't know how to do.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I love that. It's leveraging superpowers of people, right? And honoring their time in how they use those. That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So when we look at the whole approach here is making sure that meetings of any kind, we're structuring these to have clarity, drive engagement, and have this structure for people to participate. So we identified these 3 modes. We talked about how to call those out and set the tone for those. We talked about, like, if things shift, they can, right? If we came into this as, this is a flare meeting, but then there's some focused time, we can call that out and see if there's, we're gonna shift and add in a space for that. What about, and maybe there's more to add there, but I'm curious about meeting actions post a meeting. Like, you know how many times you like, yeah, meeting, 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 and there's all these things talked about, but like actually doing the things, like where does that come in with like what happened in the meeting and the actions taken?
Yeah. Well, I also am a fan of the structure you guys do in your team, which is reserve whatever you know you need, 5, 10 minutes, and kind of measure. Like if I always reserve 5 and it's never enough, then start reserving 10. Just be practical and reserve time at the end of every meeting in order to say, okay, what did we decide to do? Who's doing what? When are you doing it? Like to do the action planning is what we call it in coaching. So at the end of any coaching session, this is also something that happens where we say, all right, so Nikki, what was your takeaway from this conversation? What do you want to do with this? And you have maybe 3 action items. All right, so let's talk about it. When do you want to do those? And notice I'm also letting you own deciding the when. Now, if I'm the leader in the meeting and I have a clear deadline, then I should say that. But otherwise, I want to let you own it because you are going to be better at executing on it if you set it. And you have the understanding of the context of what you're working on. So I might think it can get done in a day and you're like, "No, no, no, it's going to be 2 weeks." All right. So that's good to know. So I'm asking you like when would you like to do those things? When will you have them done by? And then here's another winning tip for leaders because we hate when we have to be the bad cop and come around and say, you didn't do it. What happened? Is you ask on the front end, all right, what do you want me to do if you don't get it done by then?
Oh, that's a good one.
And again, it's just one of these like amazing leadership hacks to let them hold themselves accountable first. And I'm always amazed. Like people will be, they kind of like the question a lot of times. They're like, "Oh yeah, I know. Sometimes I procrastinate. So like, if I don't get it done on time, just be blunt with me. Send me a message and say what the heck," because now it frees me up to not have to be the bad cop, checking in on them and getting them in trouble. But we've already set that. So whatever it looks like for you, just reserve the time at the end of the meeting to set and do action planning. Because here's the problem. I think this is one of the most common when we go into work with leadership teams, especially senior leadership teams, one of the most common issues is everyone in the meeting at the end was like, "Yep, uh-huh, we're in agreement, we're aligned." And everyone walks out thinking they're aligned. And in their head, they're all picturing something totally different. Because again, we've got different personalities in the room. And so the antidote to this is you have to actually verbalize what the plan is. For me, I think visuals are the most powerful tool here. I like to put it on a whiteboard, draw it on the screen, like some way of visualizing, here's the plan. Okay, is this all what you are thinking too? And then Nikki, you see my drawing there and you're like, "Oh no, I was thinking this." Like you're drawing it as if like that project's connected to that one and we're going to get it done this week. And I was thinking like that we had 3 months to do it. And so now we're able to close that gap of understanding. And what happens, you hear it over and over, these leadership teams, when they realize it, they go, "Oh my gosh, that's what happened with so and so last month. I was mad because they didn't deliver the thing I was expecting, but they actually were thinking like the plan was different." And one of the most common scenarios is like I, as a leader, was just kind of saying an idea out loud. I was like, "Oh, Nikki, maybe we could do our next podcast episode soon." And to me, it was just kind of an idea and it was just a concept. I didn't have anything in my head specific. Like, could you work on planning that, Nikki? And then you go off, especially when it's like the employee, you go off and you're like, "Okay, he wanted me to do a project to plan the next podcast episode, and you spend like 10 hours planning this big thing. I had it the other day. Someone like made this whole Gantt chart, and I was like, no, no, no. I literally just meant like think about it for 10 minutes. And they thought it was this big thing and they spent all this time on it. And I was like, oh gosh, I didn't communicate it clearly enough. So close the gap by saying, all right, here's what I'm hearing. Is that what you were hearing? But you're right. A lot of times we are too rushed for that. We think it's not needed or we just don't leave time. Well, it takes a lot more time to clean up all the issues caused by the misunderstanding later. And I mean, so many stories I could tell of like, there was a recent one, big company. It was 9 months. Their team had been working on something they did not intend for them to work on. And I'm counting the salaries. I'm like, the head count and the salary. You guys just spent millions of dollars wasted because you didn't spend 10 minutes at the end of the meeting checking for understanding.
Wow. And that right there is like the magnitude of the compound effect of bad meetings, right? You're just talking about one particular meeting that was really important that guided these outcomes that like tons of wasted money, right? From lack of planning and just yeah. So you had said earlier, Steve, this tip that I love so much, and it goes to this core of everything I want to lead is around ownership by all, right? I love the concept of everyone owning their part, their role, this is your company too, right? Like this ownership level. And you had said from a micro perspective, this amazing tip. Okay, so fill in the blank name, John. What if this isn't done by that date that you shared, that you're doing this task by this date? And then they're sharing with you, please call me out or whatever that is. And you're like just such a great ownership based model for leadership. And then another tip that I have that has been a game changer for us is we use a collaborative work management tool technology, and we call that our central source of truth. We use monday.com. And so everything from meetings is then tracked with the assignments of like John in that example, exactly what he said and the date, and any notes. And we're doing that on the meeting. Like we have one dedicated person that's putting that in there. And then we also have started, and we can't wait to just get better about this, started now with our clients, bringing them into certain portions where they have full transparency on what our team's working on and what they are doing as well. So it's not just our team meetings that then guide monday.com, but it then our meetings with our clients as well. It's been a game changer.
Yeah, it's so good. And I think this is one of the few areas where the pandemic and the quick shift to hybrid and remote work is a benefit to you as a leader. I mean, there's goods and bads to it all, but I think one of the biggest benefits is it forced us to shift from saying, okay, you're doing your job because you're sitting at your desk from 9 to 6, which was never the correct model anyway. That was already decades and decades outdated, but we were still operating in that model basically. Like, you deserve your paycheck because you're sitting there from this time to that time. And now that we can't do that, we can't monitor and track all that. It is a great forcing mechanism for leaders to start tracking on outcomes and ownership instead. But it starts with us. Yeah, we have to define clear outcomes. All right, I am asking you to do this, and let's define what the outcome looks like, what success looks like. And now I'm measuring you based on your delivering on that promise instead of, oh, yeah, you were sitting over there in that chair for a certain number of hours.
Oh my gosh. And going back to ownership, right? It's like no one ever wants to feel micromanaged. We don't need to be in the same space as people all the time to be able to get results, right? And it's like reworking the what is the result over the time spent? That's irrelevant, right? As long as we're predicting the right amount of time for our projects and deadlines and things like that, right? Like time does matter, but it's about those outcomes and results and crafting those. So yeah. Anyway, so much good stuff here. And just want to remind everyone that Greenhouse has created this awesome quiz that we're linking into this series, the RootsUp quiz. And the RootsUp quiz can help guide you individually as a leader to figure out where the next steps of prioritization are for you to really guide, like whether it is, enhancing those one-on-ones as the priority versus these enhancing the meetings or your own calendar as, owning your own as an individual. There's so much to all of this, but I highly recommend if you haven't taken the Roots Up quiz, that is a great place to start. And Steve, before we head out, anything else in closing on this topic or other resources that we wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, all of these topics we're covering, we have free videos, like explainer videos, and we have mini courses, we have coaching sessions. We have ways if you want to dive deeper into this and really activate. I mean, it's one thing to talk about this stuff, it's another to activate on it. And that's why coaching is so valuable. It's that forcing mechanism like, okay, I know I'm not going to get around to this, but if it's on my calendar to talk with you about it and I have the steps, then I will. So, all of that's there for anyone who needs it. But I want to emphasize the quiz that you mentioned because if we're trying to grow more of the life that we want and the leadership that the team culture we want, then we got to have the right roots in place. And that's why we call it roots up. It's like it starts at the roots and grows up from there. But a lot of times as leaders, we try to rush to results and we skip, we skip some steps. So this is just one of those topics that's a root thing. If you're not running your meetings effectively, then all the attempts at getting results and making money and all this stuff is going to flop. So let's get these root things in place. And to your point, it's overwhelming. I feel it too every day. I'm like, there's so much that has to happen. Where do I start? What matters? And that's the purpose of this quiz. It kind of simplifies it. Within 5 minutes, it's like, here's where you start. This is your next step. Like, forget about all the other stuff right now. Here's your next step. And yeah, would love to just help people listening activate and do something with whatever they're inspired with. Because if we don't do it, then it's just a nice idea on the shelf.
Right. Yes. And so much of this, like that we talked about today, is like how to then take the actions from meetings that are used well. Like our time is used well, but then the actions, same thing really with everything, right? It's like, how are we building in that roadmap and knowing what to prioritize, which is what the quiz can help with, right? For those main roots efforts, and then building the systems to apply and take action guided by your team. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. That's my favorite thing about this podcast and really your whole network is there's something in the air. There's some kind of vibe that is like, no, we're moving, we're taking action, we're doing something with it. And I don't know about people listening, but to me, that's really refreshing. Like I'm kind of tired of learning a million things. I want to see change. I want to see results. And to me, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. So like I I shut that down when people are like, well, that's squishy. People skills, interpersonal stuff, that's the soft stuff. I'm like, no, no, no. Any great leader will tell you that's actually the real stuff. So yeah, I think this is great.
so good. Thank you so much, Steve. We just left the world a little bit better. Now, go do something with it.